part of our service is an inspirational speaker, and we are very pleased to have Reverend Joanna Bartlett here. She is a certified grief recovery specialist with the Grief Recovery Institute, an ordained minister and certified medium through the National Spiritualist Association of Churches, and a Reiki master. And I believe she's also a really great musician, as I remember. And I've heard her singing, and oh yeah, I remember her singing and playing. And she's also the author of several books on intuition and mediumship development, which are on the back table under the tree. If you are interested, you can have a look after service. She began studying mediumship and healing and psychic development after moving to Rochester in 2001, in her early 20s, and provided platform mediumship to congregations in Rochester and in the spiritualist community of Lilydale, New York, where she was a member of the Lilydale Assembly. Joanna was a student minister and licensed minister here at Plymouth Spiritualist Church from 2005 to 2007, which is also when she became ordained through the NSAC. Joanna now lives in Eugene, Oregon with her 2 children, and we are truly blessed to have her return to serve our church whenever she is visiting here in Rochester. Joanna?
Thanks for the lovely intro. All of it's true. It makes you sound very important, though. All those like credentials and things. It's like, wow. Oh, that happened. So it is lovely to be back here. My kids are visiting their dad. I come here to pick them up because they still can't fly on their own. And so I got in last night after midnight, and so hopefully I am coherent today. I didn't get to sleep until like after 1:30, and I don't even know what time like my body thinks it is. There's always some jet lag that's going on. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is spiritualism and grief. Because grief is such a fun subject. Yay! You're like, great. You're all thinking, I'm really glad I showed up today so that somebody could talk to us about grief. So I have a question for you. So within, say, the last 5 to 10 years, who here has lost a loved one, a friend, a not so loved one, had the end of a relationship, whether that's a divorce, has moved or lost a job, or all of these things are grief. And you know, if anybody should be familiar with grief, it's spiritualists. I mean, really, this, you know, it's all based on being able to communicate. It's not all based, but a large part of spiritualism is based upon being able to communicate with people who are no longer in physical bodies. So, you know, whether that's like through mediumship, right? Whether you are doing mediumship work, and you are connecting with people who are in spirit and bringing messages to people, those people are grieving. Or whether if you're not a medium, it is you come in contact with grieving people, and most of you are grieving people yourselves, as you have already accepted or admitted. The people who come to spiritualist churches are often grieving. That's often a primary reason a lot of people will start coming to a spiritualist church, is because they want to connect in with a loved one who has passed, and that they want to know that they're okay and receive the healing that mediumship provides. But as a society, we are not taught effective tools or skills for dealing with grief and for recovering from it. So there was a study done several years ago. I don't know who did the study, and I don't know when it was done, but I do know that it's a real thing. They studied the most common comments that people get within like 72 hours after a loved one dies. And there were 141 comments that came up, you know, over and over again, the most common ones. Out of these 141 comments, how many do you think were helpful comments? Any guesses?
10%. 10%.
Wow, you guys are even more pessimistic than I am. So 15% of those comments are helpful. So out of 144, 19 are helpful and 122 aren't. And so after you lose somebody that's dear to you, all your well-meaning, then most people really are well-meaning. Friends and family will make these comments, and the majority of them not very helpful. So grief. What is grief exactly? So there's a lot of ways that you can define grief. I am, as was mentioned in my intro, I am a certified grief recovery specialist with the Grief Recovery Institute. And so, lovely grief recovery handbook here. Not my book, so I'm not selling it, but it is a wonderful book. And the definition of grief that the Grief Recovery Institute uses is it is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. That's grief. It's those conflicting feelings. And it covers all kinds of losses. If you think about, say, a divorce, you have conflicting feelings about the change in that familiar pattern of behavior of being married to this person, right? Some of it's like, oh, thank God I am no longer married to this person and that's over. And then there's the feelings of like, oh, that didn't work out. How do I feel about that? What do I think that means about me? What does that mean about future relationships? It's those conflicting feelings, and that's grief. Even if you have a loved one that dies, like my mom passed of cancer several years ago, and conflicting feelings. It was quick. It was 3 weeks from the day that she was diagnosed to the day she was passed. So it's like, well, she didn't suffer very much, and she's gone, and I don't get to hang out with her anymore. So it's those conflicting feelings. That's grief. And the grief of not having my mom around. So all kinds of losses cause us to have grief. But what I have learned is that we're just not prepared to deal with grief. And the way that I came to start studying this, because it does seem like a bit of an odd topic for spiritualists, or in a way, and certainly for somebody doing mediumship work, the mediumship is what brought me to learning more about grief and how to deal with it better. And that's because I would get a lot of grieving people who would come to see me for readings, and mediumship can help. Mediumship really does bring healing to know that your loved one is fine, has transitioned successfully, can still connect in with you, can give you messages for your life that is still there, that love is still alive. And even for, not so loved ones, because I've brought them through as well, especially difficult parental relationships perhaps, or even ex-spouses or whoever, to find healing, right? To communicate what wasn't communicated, to connect, that can provide a lot of healing. But what I found is that sometimes that's all somebody needed, was that connection, and that would help them on their healing journey. And sometimes people got kind of stuck, and it wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough of what they needed to move forward. So I began kind of studying grief. I'm like, okay, well, I'm apparently doing grief counseling now, so I should learn some tools to do it properly. And so that's how I found the Grief Recovery Institute and the Grief Recovery Handbook and started going through it. And then, thought I should get certified in actually doing this so I can work with people officially with it. So, what I've learned is that we're not prepared to deal with grief. Society does not teach us how to help people. We're taught essentially to acquire things in life. We're not taught what to do when we lose them. So if you think about one of your losses, the folks who raised their hand, when that loss occurred, did you feel like you were equipped to deal with it? Or did you go, oh my God, now what do I do? Because we're literally given no tools. And the things that we are given, the things that we do learn, that we're taught like from birth, from our some usually well-meaning parents, are not helpful things. So some of these are, and you can let me know if you identify with them. The first one is don't feel bad. Heard that one? Don't feel bad, have a cookie. It's often what it is when you're a kid. Something happens, your friends don't talk to you one day, somebody dies, your pet dies, you end a relationship. Don't feel bad, it's okay. And people say this in a very well-meaning way because they really want you to not feel bad, but they're also trying to fix you when they're saying this. And you're supposed to feel bad. Grief is normal. Grief is a normal and natural reaction to loss. You're supposed to feel grief. Not feeling it, like you can't move through it without experiencing it. So don't feel bad is like completely unhelpful. Yet we say it all the time. The second one is replace the loss. Right? Have you ever broken up and ended a relationship and had somebody else say, well, there's plenty of other fish in the sea. You can just get somebody new. We do this all the time. When I was a teenager and I was living in Florida and I had finally gotten a cat. I had wanted a cat for so long, and we finally adopted a cat. Her name was Weasel. We got her from the Humane Society, and she was amazing. She used to nibble my eyelashes to wake me up in the morning. She's the sweetest cat. And on Christmas Eve, she died. It's the short story. We found her in the neighbor's pool. I don't know if she got in a fight or something. We took her to the emergency vet, and the vet said, there's nothing we can do, and this will cost. My mom was like, this is going to cost a fortune. And so, the cat died. And then my birthday's in January, and I said, I need another cat. I was the one trying to replace the loss in this case. And so I got another cat called Hobbs, who was also awesome, and who I really didn't appreciate or love because she wasn't Weasel, and I was grieving Weasel, and I wasn't really growing through the grief because I was replacing the loss. And it wasn't until kind of much later in my relationship with Hobbs, who lived to be 19, so this cat hung out with me for a really long time, that I really was able to connect with her. And she died actually the same year my mom did, and I have not had another pet since. Yeah, and we're working on getting another cat now, but because I've learned not to replace the loss. The third one is to grieve alone, to isolate yourself and to grieve and deal with your feelings, or not deal with your feelings on your own. These are things that you started learning when you were a kid, primarily from your parents. Who here has heard things like, if you're going to cry, go to your room to cry. Laugh and the world laughs with you. Cry and you cry alone. Or I'll give you something to cry about. Right? Grieve alone. If you're going to have these uncomfortable feelings, go somewhere else to do them by yourself. Don't include other people. And we've become so socialized in this. I know I have, and I'm British. I'm half British, half French. I was born in England, as you might be able to tell. And I have thought that this is part of my identity. Well, I just want to go be alone. That's what I've been taught to do. You have difficult or uncomfortable feelings, go in your room and close the door so that nobody else has to deal with it. But it's not a helpful way for you to heal. The fourth one is just to give it time. Time heals all wounds, right? So do any of you have a loss that's occurred, say 10, 20 years ago that still hurts? Mm-hmm. So how much time, do you think is supposed, how many decades or eons is time going to heal things in? Time alone doesn't heal wounds. Time plus the right actions heals. The fifth one is be strong for others. We're good at being strong for other people, right? Not dealing with our own feelings, our own stuff, being strong. When I was 10, I moved to Barbados with my mom. I had an older brother and a younger half-sister in England, and my parents divorced. And so I moved to Barbados just with me and my mom. And so I was 10 years old, and her friends, people around me would say, you need to be strong for your mom. You need to be there for your mom. I'm 10 years old. How am I supposed to be there for my mother? But that's what we're taught. And when, difficult things happen, we go, okay, well, I've had this loss, but I need to be strong for my kids. I need to not show them that I am grieving. Be strong for them. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help them. The sixth one, the last one, is to keep busy. Right? Some grief occurs, some loss occurs. We keep busy. We just keep doing stuff. We distract ourselves by some of the things I'm going to talk about next, actually, which is one of the ways that we often react to grief. Instead of actually dealing with the emotions that we're feeling, the ways that we react to grief, in this book they call them short-term energy-relieving behaviors, because when you're dealing with all this grief, you often have a huge drop in your energy level because it's a lot to deal with. We don't, often when we think about energy, right, and how we use energy, we think of like physical energy, doing stuff, gardening, shoveling, cleaning, I don't know, whatever other physical things you do. Clearly that's what I do physically. Running, I don't do that. That uses physical energy, right? And so it makes sense that our energy gets depleted when we do a lot of those things. Mental energy, though, and emotional energy, like the mental work, actually takes a whole lot of energy. So does emotional work. It takes energy. And so when we have all this grief going on, it takes a lot of energy. So ways that we try to relieve some of this energy loss are things like food. Remember, here, have a cookie. Don't feel bad. But food, I know I do this. There's certain things that I go, oh God, I need a cup of tea and some ginger cookies. That's going to help me feel better. Alcohol or drugs, isolation, exercise. Some of these things that we do to distract ourselves can be mostly positive unless we start doing them to the exclusion of dealing with what is going on. Or work, for instance, shopping, sex, and then fantasies such as books, movies, Candy Crush. Anybody like to get on their phone and stop thinking about what's going on and move the shiny things around? I am guilty of doing that. And social media. Get on the internet, get on Facebook, scroll, see what's going on. It doesn't actually help you deal with any of the things that you need to deal with. Because after those stirbs, as we call them, after those are gone, the loss is still there. Grief, remember, is a natural and normal response to loss. You're supposed to feel it. So how do you heal your own grief? It's great, Joanna, you've talked all about what grief is and how we're doing it all wrong. That's so super helpful, right? Actually knowing about how you're not doing it wrong, but using the incorrect tools. The Grief Recovery Institute likes to use the analogy of trying to paint a room with like a hammer and a screwdriver. If I gave you a can of paint and a hammer and a screwdriver and I said, paint this room, you go, what now? Okay, well I can use a screwdriver to get the paint can open, I guess. So just like throw it at the walls, do I finger paint? Like it's not an effective way to do it, right? But the ways that we've learned to deal with grief, right? Don't feel bad, replace the loss, grieve alone, just give it time, be strong for others and keep busy. It's like having a hammer and a screwdriver and trying to paint the room. They don't work, they're just not effective tools. There's nothing wrong with you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. It's just that you haven't had the right tools to do the thing that you need to do. Does that make sense? So knowing this, right, means that you can change. It means that you can learn new things, you can learn new tools and learn how to apply them. And so you can create change in your life. And it's really actually not that hard. So becoming aware that the tools that you have, the tools that you've learned, don't really work is one step. Becoming aware that unresolved or incomplete grief exists within you is another step of awareness. Going, yeah, Yeah, I have some stuff. I know I have stuff. I've been doing this work now, and I've been going through my relationships and completing them. I still have stuff. It's part of being human, I think. Then kind of taking responsibility for your role in it. Accepting your own role in the relationship and in the incompleteness of how you feel about that relationship. If it is a relationship with a not so loved one, or the end of a romantic relationship, taking responsibility for your role in that, whatever it may be, however much of it may be. It may be this much, maybe this much of, the bits that didn't work so well in that. Or even if it was a fantastic relationship, it's taking responsibility for your feelings right now, and what you're doing, and how you feel right now. And then, what I love about the grief recovery method is it gives you I'm not going to get into all the steps because, I'm probably running out of time right now. I didn't look at the clock when I started. It gives you some very concrete, really doable steps in which you become emotionally honest with yourself and with those relationships, and gives you a way to actually address them, to look at them, and to make apologies, not actually to the person, but within your own emotional self. Any apologies that you need to make, any forgiveness that you need to give. Forgiveness is a huge part of it. And forgiveness is hard. I will not, it's a hard place to get to sometimes. But just remember that forgiveness, it's all about you. It's a completely selfish act. It's wonderfully selfish. The best self-care you can do is to forgive the people in your life that need forgiving. It's not about them at all. It's really all about you. And to address, the hopes and dreams and expectations that you had in those relationships for how things could have been different or better or been more of something. And it's not easy, right? But living a life of grief is also not easy. And it is in the principles of spiritualism in terms of taking personal responsibility. It's one of the things you're supposed to do as a spiritualist. And in terms of how you can then respond to other people who are grieving in a helpful way, because it is one of the difficult things. I mean, when somebody passes, and somebody who has a loved one who dies, you're like, oh God, what do I say to them? How am I helpful? We want to be helpful. So the first thing is to know how not to respond. Don't do any of those 6 things, right? Give them hugs. People don't want to be fixed. They want to be listened to, they want to be loved, but they don't want to be fixed. You can ask them, well, what happened? Because they want to be listened to. They don't want you to tell them, they don't want you to give them these intellectual comments like, well, be thankful, he's not a pain anymore, he's in a better place, or you'll find somebody else, the living must go on, or you can have another child, somebody that's lost a child, right? That's the thing that people actually say to them, well, you can have more children, like that entire experience counts for nothing. Don't change the subject. If somebody who has lost whatever that grief is, right? And it can be so many different things, not just the loss of a loved one. Don't change the subject. Let them talk about it. Be willing to be emotionally uncomfortable. Like I've made you all emotionally uncomfortable this morning, I think. Which is totally fine. But be willing to be with that. Be willing to be with these emotions. The reason that it's emotionally uncomfortable for you, honestly, is that it's because it's resonating with your own grief, your own unresolved feelings. That happens and you go, oh God, there's like all this stuff inside me that is starting to come up. So be willing to sit with that and be with them in that place. And really, probably the most important thing is go to your heart. Get out of your head, get out of the intellectualizing, and just go to your heart and connect in that way. So that's what I have to share with you this morning about grief and how I feel, at least, it relates to spiritualism and to mediumship. And I just want to say that, to be completely emotionally honest, right? It's really weird for me to be here without Cliff Donovan. But that's grief for me, that I'm grieving him and the loss of him. Last time I was here in January, he played music, and I had no idea that that was the last time I was going to get to see him in the physical form. I know he's here, like, I touched in with him, I think it was last night. I was like, you can be there tomorrow? And he's like, of course I'm going to be there tomorrow. And so I know he's here, right? And so, you know, with spiritualism, like, we know our loved ones are still here, and we still miss them, and both of those things are true. We still grieve them, and it's okay. It's okay to have those feelings. They're completely normal and natural. And so I will leave that with you. With love. Thank you.